Testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing is step one. And before there's testing, there really kind of has to be conversation. So this really isn't step one as much as this is the first process that we go through when we're building a team. And that's testing. And so testing gets a bad rap with a lot of people. And it's not because it's not useful. It's not because it's impractical. It's not because it's a waste of time. It's because it's misused. A lot of times you see this like in parenting. Kids are testing us all the time. Why are they testing us? They want to test the boundaries and the limitations so that they can grow and take advantage, get leverage on a situation. So you should test like a kid tests. And that's how we test. But we try to make sure that the people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. So first things first, let's get clear on one thing. Testing is imperative for the maximum development of the team's peak performance. If you have you're trying to look for basically the best course of action all the time, improving, sustainably improving, because we want to be the best at the end of the season. And we'd love to have you for the next season. And for seasons after that, if you still have eligibility, if it's high school or college, or especially if there's still time left on your contract and you still want to play if you're a professional. So what goes with that is understanding that this testing is going to be the basis where we can actually have iteration, which is the lifeblood of greatness. That's right. Iteration is the lifeblood of greatness. And it's because you look at where you're at, and then you look at what's going on in your environment, and then you adapt or you modify your strategy or your tactics or techniques, or we don't change who you are, but we optimize what you do in order to improve your performance levels. That's iteration. It's the greatest concept wins. And we see this all the time with incredible companies, especially that endure over time. They always talk about going to the boardroom and there being like a war in there. They go in there and they're battling it out. The greatest idea wins. And it's not just the greatest idea, it's just that conversation with the ideas. It ends up being that beginning idea that wins in the end is a different idea because it keeps getting value added along the way. And that's where testing comes in. And unfortunately, a lot of people hear testing, they think of standardized testing or whatever, the bad rap that testing gets in schools. It's just because there's some confusion around how it gets used. And so put that, whatever you think about testing, to the side and think about testing as iteration. So like, I test so that I can see where we are, so I know what we need to do to cause change. There's a person who's incredible at this testing, this asking philosophy in online marketing. The guy's name is Trey, and Trey has this method called the ask method. And this is recently that he's had this in the last 10 years. Anyways, and so we've been doing this in our business for 20 years in a different way. He uses it for marketing. We use it actually for training. And so testing, though, is a little bit about marketing in a way. And you need to understand your market. That's the point, though. Before you can really market, you need to understand the market. So what he does is he uses this testing as a question so that he can understand what drives them and understand what their needs are. And then he can best serve them. And that's the same thing that you want to do as a coach and as a team anyway. So let's get clear on a few things. And that is, we want to look to understand what the main goal is. What are our main goals? Our big, hairy, audacious goals. We want to understand what the biggest opportunity is. That's really important. Our biggest obstacles, we need to know them too. We want to know what our greatest asset is, or the lifeblood of our team. Meaning, if you look at a particular team, you're going to see a different greatest asset on that team. For some people, so let's look at in sports. A lot of times, you'll hear people say, they're a very methodical team. They're big and strong. They impose their will. Some teams might be, they're just really well conditioned. Like they really get you at the end of the game. Or it might be like, they're a really small, quick team. Or so that's the lifeblood. That's the common asset or the greatest asset of that team. So that's kind of the underlying thread of what they're working on and what they're building on. So you need to build on those strengths, and so you need to know this stuff going into your testing. It's really important. Don't just throw tests. Like this day and age, kids are smarter and smarter and smarter, and when you throw something out there that you haven't done any thought work on and you're not going to follow up on, you break trust, and then there's disintegration amongst the ranks, and that's not a good thing, and that's not what you're trying to do with testing. And so therefore, testing must be not just the beginning of something, but it needs to be in the middle of things too, so that you can see where they are. So I'm going to tell you about 3 different types of testing that we do. Before we do that though, let me tell you who you need to have at the table. Okay, if you're going to be testing and you really, really want to develop a great testing protocol, process, program, framework, whatever you want to call it, scaffolding, you need to have these people involved. The sports coaches need to be involved. They have to be involved. It's not an isolation, it's a collaboration. And it's the main theme of the things that I talked about earlier, the questions that we asked. What's the greatest opportunity? What's this big, hairy, audacious goal? What's the obstacles? What's our main asset? Like understanding these things. And these people need to sit down and understand these things and come from their area of expertise and put what they need to put into the recipe, right? It's not just, an apple pie isn't just apples, right? There's all sorts of different things in there. So the strength coach has definitely got to be, or somebody who's a representative for the strength and conditioning staff needs to be there. Sports medicine representative, it needs to be, it could be the AT, could be the head trainer, it could be a PT, it might be the sports medicine doc depending on the team. And so that's important to have them in there because they're going to be coming from a therapy standpoint, and that's important to have that. The next piece is going to be your mental coach, or this could be a sports psychologist or sports psychiatrist depending on the level of, that we're talking about here. If it's pro or if it's major college, there's going to be a sports psychiatrist involved or sports psychologist. Or it could just be a mental strength coach. And I don't mean it's a different designation as to where their training came from. So the next piece is there needs to be probably your sports nutritionist really needs to be there, or somebody from that staff should be there. And here's the 6th piece, and this is the most important one to have at the table, the team, or team representatives or team captains, right? It's just like sitting down to have negotiations. You need to have a union rep there, right? Not because it's a bad thing, but because they're involved. Heck, they're the people who are going to be out there executing stuff. They're the front line people. They need to know what the heck's going on because they might have some crazy, incredible feedback that you never thought about, right? Because you're not in the game anymore. You're out of the game, which is actually how you're the best coach, but you need that feedback. So let's go through number 1. We're looking to build a few things. We're looking to build trust, accountability, community, belief in what we're trying to do, momentum, right? We're looking to build like a sense of investment, and we're looking to educate, and we're also looking to create habit-forming actions. That's what some of the hopes for what the outcomes are going to be from the testing. Like the testing is going to bring about these things, and that's the definite chief aim to talk about laws of success in Napoleon Hill. That's a definite chief aim of this, right? And those are the things that we're going to do. So goal of testing, number 1. General physical preparedness. That's one of the tests that we're going to look at. We want to know whether or not they're physically prepared and they prepared in the off season to actually, or whatever, because if it's a weekly test, we want to see if they're prepared for the game. And this doesn't mean it's a hard test. It just means it needs to be appropriate for what you're trying to determine they're able to do. Now, general physical preparedness is usually just whether or not they're going to be, whether or not they put in some time and energy. So that's up to you to decide what you want to do in that testing protocol. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. And I'm not going to get too much into it. The next piece is energy systems. You're going to test energy systems within that general physical preparedness. And so just a quick minute on energy systems. This is where this drives me nuts. Energy systems. Like if you're testing for volleyball or wrestling, it's mostly short-term energy system. There's a little bit of intermediate in there, but there's next to no long-term energy system usage in those sports. So, we have a ton of high-level volleyball players and a ton of high-level wrestlers, and I'm telling you, when you test them on running, the only thing you're testing them on is whether or not they ran to prepare or if they're a good runner. testing them on long distance running is that's long range energy. You're not doing that. That's the wrong energy system to test. It makes no sense. You're actually defeating the purpose. And so you're gonna create a little distrust there in whether or not somebody should believe that you know what you're doing. So energy systems, 1. 2, overall health and wellness. Like, you want to see, like, I don't care if it's Coach Cook's functional movement screen or something like that. See whether or not they're functionally ready to safely play, compete, and train. That's an important piece. You should already know that going into this, but like when you test it out in the spring, now you're testing again in the fall, we want to see if they've made progress, if they've healed up. And then the third thing is in that general physical preparedness. The general physical preparedness is for the entire team, which means there's going to be an opportunity there and a goal of team bonding. Other people can see other people are putting in work, and you can see whether or not, it looks like they've improved. If they tested together in the spring, now they're testing together again. It's kind of a fist pump opportunity, like, hey, nice job, I see you, like, good work. Like, it's a good morale builder, and it's an important thing to understand. So make sure that you understand that too. The next piece is going to be, so that's 1, general physical preparedness. That's what we just talked about. The second test is going to be specific readiness tests. And this is where it's position specific or individual specific. Now, these tests aren't always just physical. Let me put that in there, okay? There's testing where you can kind of test what they've been doing nutritionally. There's testing where you can kind of test where they're at mentally too, where they're at mentally and emotionally. You can put them through different tests to see what they're going to do, how they're going to react to emotions, and what their mentality or mindset is on the situation. And those are other individual specific tests that we're not going to get into, but are really important to have in there. Now, an easy one to give you as an example, specific testing, an offensive lineman for football, like a good example, an offensive lineman, are you going to give them the same testing you're going to give a defensive back? No. Are you going to give the defensive back the same testing as a quarterback? No. Okay, so there's specific needs within those individual positions that you'd want to focus on. Now let's go one step further. There could be 2 people at the exact same position, and they have a different main asset that they bring to the table for themselves. And this is where you develop a specific test for them. And it might not be, or it could be a particular movement. It could be like, hey, let's see where you're, like, let's say for wrestling, the person has a really good sweep single or something. I might want to look at a particular movement that's going to be more important for that sweep single, because that's what they're going to execute on. And maybe they wrestle 184 pounds. And another 184 pounder, which would be considered the same position, is not going to be hitting sweep singles. So if they're not hitting sweep singles, they don't need the same level of strength at that one area. So that's an important thing to recognize. You're not going to test them the same way, and it don't matter the same way. They have different skills, and so you test them differently. This is specificity of testing, which is important, because you don't care if they got better at the same thing that the guy that does the dart single gets better at. It's different, okay? There's different mechanics involved. If you want to be specific about your testing, this is how you do it. We get asked all the time, and then people don't want to do the work. Or they do want to do the work, and they do it, and then they're like, wow, this is crazy. This is so awesome. So then the last thing was what I was talking about with Trey earlier, is the fact that determining where they need coaching is really another great need of the testing. And so the testing goes through, and you see, oh, they're not improving in this area, but they need to improve in this area. Okay, I guess we have to come up with a better strategy, a better technique, better tactics in order to execute on this huge opportunity they have. Or what is it that we're looking at that we think is so that isn't? And so maybe some of the things that you are thinking are realities are not realities, or they're at least not interacting with you at the level that you feel that they are. So these are important steps to go through, and it's really important that you get everything aligned. That's what testing is about. And it's not a one-time thing. Be careful to make sure that you don't equate testing to punishment, or connect punishment to not, quote unquote, passing your tests. It's a dangerous line to start when you say, you got to pass. It's like, okay, what does that mean? It's like, oh, everybody has to pass, or we keep doing the test until we pass. This is the funniest thing ever. It's like, hey, listen, you didn't pass the test the first time. We're going to retake it right now with no rest, and you're going to pass it. And if you don't pass it, we're going to keep on redoing it. It's like sometimes when kids are doing 300 shuttle and they don't pass it the first time. All right, we're going to do it again. Well, if you passed it the second time, really the only thing that we're determining is that they didn't even try the first time. Really, that's what we're deciding. So that's a level of lack of understanding of the opportunity. And so you're not going to prove anything by making the entire team do it again. That makes no sense. And that's usually where we lead to injuries. It's because there's just a misunderstanding of what testing is good for. Another thing is if you use it as a punishment, or you say it's a pass-fail, when it's a pass-fail, that's white and black, and that's fine because there's a sense of clarity there, and could be pride and accomplishment. The problem is not everybody is going to be gifted at passing certain things. Certain people, for instance, you might have somebody who in football is an incredible linebacker, but he might not have the greatest 40 time. So if he doesn't pass your cutoff for the 40 and he has to keep doing it until he passes it, well, you might not be having him play on your team, because what's happening too is if they fail and they really genuinely feel like they can't pass it no matter how hard they're trying, their confidence is going to keep going down. Now, if they have the growth mindset and they're stoic and all this other stuff, like, they might get stronger with their mind. But if they don't pass it after a certain number of tests, they on some level will start to lose self-confidence. And you're going to have not a better player because of it, you're going to have a worse player. So you use the test as a feedback mechanism to understand where they need to push more effort and focus if it's necessary for them to be a better athlete. And so this is critical. And understanding that that is what we're looking for is absolutely necessary. The other thing that happens when you say it's pass-fail and somebody fails is if you said they have to pass in order to play, how do you get around that? Unless you say, oh, you have to pass in order to play, or you have to do this, this, and this after practice in between, and then you can still play. Like with an academic situation. A lot of times people are like, well, in high school, if you're failing a subject or something, as long as you go in for extra credit, or as long as you stay after for that, the teacher will sign it and you can go practice and you can play in games. So you need to understand and develop strategies if you're going to go pass-fail to make sure that you don't lose trust and integrity with the team. And so that the player doesn't lose trust and integrity with the team also. And here's the third thing, and this is the most important thing that people will forget unless you have a sports psychiatrist with you, and that is they lose trust and integrity with themselves. Let me say that again. They lose trust and integrity with themselves because they start to fail to believe that they can do something. And if they're trying, and they've been trying for a while, the only time that they're really going to pass it really quick right afterwards is if they weren't preparing. If they weren't preparing before in advance, and then all of a sudden they start preparing, and then they get a big boost and they pass, okay, that's great. But that person wasn't really trying to begin with. What about the person who's trying, and they prepared, and they still couldn't pass? What do you have that they can do so that they don't lose themselves as a player and as a teammate and as a teammate and a player to themselves? Because we have to be our own cheering section. You have to say, I'm going to do it in the face of adversity or in the face of fans. Like I have to be able to know that within myself. So how is your testing going to build you up and build the team up? And I wanted to recap just for a second. Like in testing, we're looking for it to build trust, to build accountability, to build community, to build belief in the overall, overarching theme, concept, or, goal of the team. We're looking for it to build momentum, to build a sense of an investment for ourselves, to educate, and also to build habit-forming actions. And this is really important. And the people at the table have to be the coaching staff, the strength coaching staff, the sports medicine staff, the mental coaching staff, the sports nutrition staff, and the team, or representatives from each of those individual departments. They need to be the same ones consistently, though. It's a collaboration, not an isolation. And this is testing, and it's step one of building that team.